Indeed, I am Saruman. One might almost say, Saruman as he should have been. But come now, tell me of yourselves. I have passed through fire and deep water since we parted. I have forgotten much that I thought I knew, and learned again much that I had forgotten. I can see many things far off, but many things that are close at hand I cannot see. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we will be continuing our discussion about the major differences between the Two Towers Extended Edition movie and the book. I'll link some related articles and videos in the description below and cards above, as well as some of the past videos of this series, so please check those out. My friends, thank you all for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. We will start back with Merry and Pippin before they escaped the clutches of Saruman's Uruk-hai and Sauron's orcs in late February of 3019 of the Third Age. In the movie, the two factions of orcs argued, and Snaga, a smaller orc, attempted to eat the hobbits. The other orcs dug into him and said meat was back on the menu, which is a top-tier line if I do say so myself. But the other orc, Grishnach, still attempted to kill the hobbits before a spear was planted in his back. The riders of Rohan had come, and the hobbits escaped into the forest. Grishnach pursued them before Treebeard killed him and found the two hobbits. He then took the hobbits to the White Wizard in the forest. Now in the book I remember this being a very interesting section, as we get Merry and Pippin's perceptions on how the orcs of Mordor led by Grishnach and the Uruk-hai of Isengard led by Ugluk spoke to each other. They mentioned the Nazgul and how the orcs of Mordor wanted to return the hobbits to the Nazgul and to Lugburs, or Barad-dûr, as it was their destination. But the Uruks were intent on taking them to Saruman in Isengard. Like in the movie, the hobbits eventually figured out that the orcs and Uruk-hai thought they had the ring, and they used this to their advantage. We also see that the company was aware of the riders that were gaining on them. Now Grishnach made his way to Merry and Pippin, not to eat them, but to find the ring himself. At the edges of the camp, the riders made ready to strike, and some had already done so silently. Pippin and Merry tried to bargain, and in the conversation, Pippin made the Gollum sound in the back of his throat, making Grishnach believe that he had the One Ring. Pippin said the orc would get nothing from them in information, unless he untied their legs. Furthermore, they mentioned how Saruman would leave nothing for the orc to have. Grishnach, who grew angry, grabbed both Pippin and Merry and snuck with them closer to the Fangorn, one under each arm, surely meaning to kill them quietly and somewhere away. But before he could get too far, he was found by a rider and killed, leaving Merry and Pippin hidden under their elven cloaks. Pippin had actually unbound his bonds already, and had left them on for show. He now took them off and grabbed some lembas for Merry and himself. They ate for a time because, well, they're hobbits, before they used Grishnach's sword to free them from the rest of their bonds. During this time the camp had not been idle, as Grishnach's dying scream alerted the orcs, and soon after the riders would close in and have battle with them. The sun arose, and, as the hobbits saw it, the red sun glinted on mail and spear, as the horns of the riders met Ortner when she arose from the east, and the singing men came forth, and did battle with their enemies. Ugluk was slain by Eomer, and the riders had victory while the hobbits slipped into the forest. Again, this is slightly different, as the orcs knew more in the book than in the movie about the importance of what Pippin and Merry had carried, or so they had thought. Now the hobbits headed into the forest to get some water, and Pippin compared the forest to Old Took's room in the Great Smiles at Tuckborough. They went to find a clearing and climbed a stony hill where no trees grew that overlooked the forest. They climbed up what seemed like rocky stairs and found the top. They spoke of the cold wind and that it would get all gray again, and Pippin said that it was a shame because he almost liked the forest. Then, a low voice began to speak to them, answering that he almost felt he disliked them, but wanted to see them first. He said that if he had seen them before he had heard their voices, he might have thought them little orcs. Yes, this was Fangorn, or Treebeard, as some called him, and he picked them up. Eventually, in trying to assess what they were, he went through a list that he was taught of the different peoples of the world, and there was no line for hobbits in the list, yet. Treebeard's list is quite a memorable thing in this book that was not in the movie. The hobbits told him how they were hole-dwellers, and to put them next to men, the big people on the list. Indeed, they told the Ent their true names, and showed him that they were rather hasty folk. Furthermore, the three discussed Gandalf and his supposed end. Treebeard did not know what to say. They would go on to discuss Lothlorien, which of old Treebeard had known as Lorelin Dornan, for Celeborn had warned the company against the Fangorn, and Fangorn himself said that he would have said much the same about Lothlorien if they were going the other way. They discussed corrupted trees with dark hearts and referred to the Old Forest, as the Fangorn Forest used to expand far to the north in both Eriador and Rovanion. Treebeard would chant to the hobbits a song as he took them to his home of Wellinghall, but he would not take them to the White Wizard as he had done in the movie. In Wellinghall they enjoyed Entdraught and became taller hobbits, both in the evening and the next morning. They discussed a bit about the Entwives and Saruman, and in the book, Treebeard was far more aware of Saruman's treachery of his forest than in the movie. But just like in both, he came to have a fury against Saruman for what he had done to his friends, trees Treebeard had known since Nut and Acorn. He would sing a song about the Entwives they had lost before going to bed. In the movie, Treebeard accepted the hobbits and took them to what seemed to be his home and sang to them of the Entwives as well. Now let's pivot back to the three hunters. In the movie, they had been on the edge of the Fangorn after Aragorn used his skills as a ranger to track the movement of the two hobbits inward. The three hunters went forth and investigated, before realizing there was a presence there with them. As to not let the White Wizard speak and put a spell on them, they elected to attack him all at once. But the wizard was able to counter every measure they took, and it was a good thing, too. The wizard revealed himself to be Gandalf the White, who returned to them at the turning of the tide. We also see his cloak and his brooch on it, meaning that he had been to Lothlorien. After speaking of his victory over the Balrog and return to life, they left the forest, and we were introduced to Shadowfax. Then they made for Edoras on their horses. Now transitioning to the book, they had just seen who they thought was Saruman during the night at their camp at the edge of the Fangorn Forest. But in the morning there were no boot marks to track. Also, Aragorn was suspicious and asked Legolas if he thought that the horses had fled in terror. But no, the elf thought it seemed as though the horses were reunited with an old friend. Aragorn thought as much. Gimli still believed that they had seen some phantom of Saruman. Aragorn did find, however, the tracks of the hobbits and another leaf of Lorien. He was able to, with his many skills as a ranger, estimate what had happened to the hobbits, just as we have previously discussed. This led them into the Fangorn, where Legolas felt young, and where the place seemed different than Mirkwood to Gimli. Legolas said he could have been happy there in other days. Although Gimli found him and his wood-elven ways odd, he said he would tread where Legolas went, but Legolas should keep his bow in hand, just as Gimli kept his axe loose in his belt, not to use on the trees, of course. Before long they came to Treebeard's Hill, and Strider noticed some strange tracks. They noted soon an old man going from tree to tree. They were ready for battle, but still had mercy in their hearts. Although Legolas had his bow at the ready, he fired not. The old man greeted them and wished to speak with them, and by spell commanded Legolas to put his bow away, and Gimli his axe. The three spoke to him guardedly, and the man spoke to them enigmatically, after the old man sprang up the rocks nimbly. He knew about their mission in tracking the two hobbits, and after moving once more, the spell was released, and the three hunters went for their weapons. But Gimli's axe leapt from his hands, Aragorn's sword had a sudden flame and was stiff, and the arrow of Legolas met a flash of flame. Thus he was revealed to them, and Gandalf's true white raiment came forth. He had returned. The three rejoiced, and Aragorn eventually named him one white rider against 9 black riders. After greetings and apologies, they had more words here than in the movie, concerning Frodo and Sam leaving, which is mentioned in a different conversation in the movie, and they spoke of the death of Boromir. Gandalf said also that it wasn't in vain that the hobbits came along, for they had a great part to play in all of this. He spoke also of the eagle who Legolas and Aragorn espied in our last episode, high above the Emyn Wheel. Gandalf told also of his contention with the Dark Tower from a high place himself, the struggle of two powers in the mind of Frodo when he was atop Amunhen at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring. They spoke of what Sauron knew concerning the ring being in the hands of a hobbit, and the Dark Lord believed that the companions made for Minas Tirith, as that is what he himself would have done. Gandalf told of Saruman, and not just his single treachery, but of his dual treachery, both to them and to Mordor as well. And they spoke of his war on Rohan. and of the Ents and their being with Merry and Pippin. He said that 4 days before he had seen Treebeard, and thought that the Ent had seen him also, thus making sense of Treebeard's confusing answer to Merry and Pippin concerning the fate of the wizard. Gandalf told of his battle with the Balrog, and late coming to Cariscalathon in Lothlorien after Gwaihir had found him, but he did not arrive in Lothlorien before the company left. Eventually, Gwaihir took him to the Fangorn forest. Finally, Gandalf relayed new words from Galadriel to the three hunters. To Aragorn, Galadriel reminded him of his Dunedain kin and the paths of the dead, and to Legolas she warned him of the calling of the sea. To Gimli, Lockbearer, she said she would be with him always, but he must have care to put his axe to the right tree. Gimli sang gladly in his dwarf tongue at this news, and said since Gandalf's head was sacred, they should look for the right one to cleave. Together, after Gandalf called to Shadowfax, and with him returned Arod and Hasufel, they set out for Rohan and Edoras. Finally, we come again to Frodo, Sam, and Gollum on their journey. In the movie, Gollum led the hobbits through the Dead Marshes in dim light, while telling some of the Dead Marshes' history, and how that land was home to a great battle many years before. Frodo and Sam were very skeptical of Gollum at this point, but Frodo eventually followed the lights, and he nearly drowned in the water, had it not been for Gollum who saved him. Frodo began to trust Gollum more afterwards, even calling him by his true name Smeagol, after having a conversation just between the two of them. But before Frodo and Gollum spoke, Frodo heard him recite the poem Cold Be Hand and Heart and Bone, which is a poem from a Barrow-wight from the Barrow-downs in the Fellowship of the Ring book. The Nazgul flew overhead, and Gollum revealed that they could not be killed, something Frodo already knew in the books. Thus they made their way on to the outskirts of the Black Gate. Now in the book, Gollum led them to the Dead Marshes by the paths he had used to hide from orcs. They stopped to rest as it was nearly day, and Gollum had hatred of the sun, or yellow face as he called it. And besides, Frodo and Sam were very weary. In the books, Sam completely distrusted Gollum, and he vowed to keep an eye on him and not sleep, at least at this point, and he told Frodo as much. But soon his weariness overcame him as well. After hours of sleep, Sam awoke to find Gollum gone. He and Frodo spoke about rationing the Lembas, as they were already beginning to run low. Frodo was more worried about accomplishing his task, and thought Lembas would not avail them if they destroyed the ring and were near at hand. Sam wept for this. The Return of the King movie would have multiple conversations, alike to this one. Gollum then returned to them filthy, but he had found food for himself, as he could not eat Lembas, like in the movie. They realized, however, as Smeagol led them on, that the hobbits had to trust him, at least enough to put their lives in his hands, as they were doing. They journeyed on through the Dead Marshes, and Frodo was already becoming more stoic and weary than the others, as his burden was growing heavier. Eventually lights appeared, and Sam asked about them. Gollum responded, saying that they were the candles of the corpses, decaying in the water from wars in the past. Sam caught Frodo staring at a light, and helped him move forward. But Frodo would not fall in the water as he did in the movie, and Sam would be the one to keep him going. But Sam thought all of this was some trickery of the Dark Lord, for it had been an age since the bodies first came to rest there. Gollum said that you could not touch them, as, for whatever dreadful reason, he had once tried. They continued carefully, for Gollum warned against the hobbits going and joining the lights. Soon Gollum sensed a change in the wind, and he was wary. Sure enough, a dark shape appeared in the sky, and a Nazgul on wings flew over after the lights went out. Gollum said that they could see everything, and he cursed the moon, or Whiteface as he called it, and said that the Nine reported all things that they saw to their master. Eventually, Smeagol continued onwards, only after the moon went down. Sam then noticed a change in Gollum's behavior. He acted would-be friendly, but gave odd looks to Frodo, and went back to his old way of speaking. Frodo was far more troubled by the evil eye, as he saw it, than he was by the weight of his own burden. As for Gollum, he felt the pressure of the eye and lust for the ring, and would have likely pursued that lust but for the promise he had made to the hobbits to help them, in fear for his life. But they continued on, with Sam walking behind Frodo trying to help him along and support him, and calling for Gollum to slow down if he ever went too fast. On the 5th morning of the journey with Gollum, they awoke to find that they were very close to Mordor. They rested, and in the evening, Sam awoke to Gollum's conversation with Smeagol. The two personas spoke of he, meaning Sauron, and she, meaning Shelob. But Sam did not know who she was yet,
and was fascinated by this conversation. After a time, Sam made his awakening known, as to make it seem like he had not heard this debate. A similar conversation would happen in the movie, between Smeagol and Gollum during the Return of the King, when Gollum first mentioned Shelob, and Sam had a rather angry and violent reaction to that. Here he was more subtle. They pressed on towards the gate, and Frodo felt rather refreshed after his rest, and said he would not need Gollum to come with them past the Black Gate, but Gollum could also not go to their enemies. That night they felt the same fear that they had felt in the marshes, twice more, as the Nazgul flew overhead. Gollum was terrified, as he knew that they were being drawn to the presence of the ring, and since the Nazgul had flown over 3 times, that was a bad omen. Gollum would go no further until Frodo threatened him by placing his hand on Sting's hilt. Thus they pushed on to the Black Gate during their despairing journey towards Mordor. And that is where we will end today's episode. Next time in our What's Different series, we will pick up with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum reaching the Black Gate and their choices thereafter, and we will continue to talk about Merry and Pippin aiding the Ents in going to war, as well as the 3 hunters and the White Rider helping Theoden arise. There are many differences in the book and movie concerning such events, and I'm excited to talk about them in our next episode of our What's Different series. Again, the biggest difference between the Lord of the Rings movies and books is how much more detail there is in the books. However, both are grand. From this episode of our What's Different series concerning the Two Towers book and movie, we see how appearances and trust must be both measured fairly, and trust is therefore very important. Merry and Pippin, Gandalf, and Gollum all had to prove to Treebeard, the 3 hunters, and Frodo and Sam respectively, that they could be trusted, at least in these moments, knowing that, in times of such peril, trust was important. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections about these differences between the Two Towers book and movie? Again, doing these videos remind me how grand both versions are, and how much I love each one. If you haven't delved into either the books or the movies, please do so. It is very worth it. Please check out our music channel, Facebook, Twitter, merch, and Patreon for our podcast and Discord server. Links are in the description below. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons, Adrian De la Torre, Chris Ortner, Peter Sheppard, Kyle Wetzel, and Lane Grimes. Thank you guys so much, it means a lot. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today, and I'll see you all again next week with a new theory video of your choosing. I left some topics up on a poll in our community tab, so please check those out. Everyone, as always, thank you all so much for the support, it means the world to me, and thank you all for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my great friends.